Marijuana and wellness. Tonight's topic is cannabis medibles, a cute little name for the edibles category of routes of administration. We're going to be talking about cookies, gummies, chocolates, and a lot more. I know this is a very popular form of route of administration or way of taking medical cannabis, and it's very straightforward, although there are some tips and tricks, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Please feel free to ask any questions by hitting the Q&A button. And I do want to point out that if you have if you are looking for more information about this whole topic, please go to Marijuana Aware. And I also want to point out that we will be taking your questions. We're answering your questions at the end of this video that's coming up in just a few minutes. These are the questions that you asked or submitted prior to the webinar. And then any questions you have during the webinar, we'll answer those as well at the end of the webinar. And if you have any questions about any medical conditions, or you have a medical condition you want some information about, please, this webinar is for information purposes only. So please ask your medical marijuana doctor, your medical marijuana practitioner, or your medical doctor. With that being said, let's jump into a presentation about Medibles. And then at the end of that, we'll answer your questions. And thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to Medical Marijuana and Wellness. Today's topic is marijuana edibles. And joining me today is Amy Green, an RN at the medical marijuana clinics in the villages. Amy, welcome.
Always great to be here.
You do a little bit of consultation on how people should be using medical marijuana products, including edibles, right?
Correct. Yeah, a lot of what I do is patient education with patients that are just getting their card for the first time. And so it's a lot of explaining how to use products safely, things to consider when picking a different product to use, and just generally making patients feel comfortable with starting the process of picking products and then building a plan for themselves.
So let's kind of jump into the webinar and chat about a few different topics. So Amy, we have routes of administration that are used for medical cannabis. There's really 4 different kinds. There's sublingual, oral, inhalation, and topical. What's your thoughts? I know that there's different categories and they all have different characteristics. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So when considering the different routes of administration, the first thing I always recommend for patients is to choose something that they're ultimately comfortable with. So like if they've never been a smoker or they're not interested in any inhaled products, we wouldn't recommend vapes or smokable flower, and we'd stick more to products that they're comfortable with.
And I know a lot of people are very interested in what we call the oral route, which is obviously being able to take edibles is part of that. But there's some interesting things we need to pay attention to, like the onset and the duration. Tell me about that, because this is really how you measure and how you decide which route of administration to use.
Exactly. So when choosing the right route of administration for you, it's really important to considering the following things. Onset, that's going to be how long it takes before you begin to feel the effects of the product. There's the duration of the product, which is how long you expect the effects to last. Ease of titration, which is your ability to adjust the dose, either increasing or decreasing. And then the availability of the entourage effect. So the entourage effect is a unique feature of cannabis where the individual components, such as the cannabinoids and the terpenes, are medically enhanced when they're together. And then finally, any materials or hardware that might be required for consumption, such as if a patient is using, say, a smokable flower and they choose to use a bong or a water pipe, that would be additional hardware.
And the nice part about medical cannabis is there's a lot of different ways you can use it. These are, again, the different ways, and these are some of the onset and also duration times for each of them. You have any comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a quick example, you can compare the routes of administration based on onset time and duration. So onset and duration are typically a trade-off. The faster something works, the faster it'll leave your system. And then conversely, like the longer it takes for something to work, the longer you can generally expect the effects to last.
Now, when we talk about edibles, which is this line right here, which we're going to talk about today, typically you'll take 15 minutes to 20 minutes to begin to feel the effect, but really the full effect could take as long as 2 hours. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And it really is going to depend on that person's familiarity, their body makeup and composition, and then their own endocrine endocannabinoid system.
But let's talk about a little bit about what edibles are. Tell me about edibles. There's a lot of different types.
Some edibles you might see, especially in Florida, we have gummies, cookies, brownies, chocolates.
And this includes some products that people can even make their own. But there's something interesting about edibles that are different from the other forms of routes of administration, and that is that they typically are digested in the stomach.
Edibles are eaten, digested in the stomach, just like a regular food. And then the actual active compounds in that product, the THC, the CBD, those are going to be absorbed through the intestines and the gut and then processed by the liver before entering the bloodstream, which is why it does take a little bit longer for the onset time.
One of the keys to understanding edibles is how to manage the timing of using them. But also there's some interesting points that although you'd have lozenges and mints that fit in this category, there's a caveat related to them because they don't get absorbed through the stomach.
Yeah, exactly. So these are often categorized as edibles. Products like lozenges and mints are formulated for absorption in the permeable tissues of the mouth, so along the gums and under the tongue. And then this delivery method is more similar to tinctures. Lozenges and mints actually offer a discrete method for absorption in pre-portioned doses. It's nicer because you do have a little bit faster onset time as you would with a tincture, and you know exactly what dose you're taking with it.
And as we talked about earlier, there's the onset and duration time.
Yeah, this is probably the most important part of taking a product is knowing the onset time and then knowing how long those effects are going to last. So for edibles, you may start to feel the effects after 15 to 20 minutes, but generally it is going to take a lot longer to feel the full effects of the product, and that can take up to an hour and a half, 2 hours. But then we do expect those effects to, again, last longer. I always tell patients your mileage may vary. So it might last 4 hours for some people, it might last 6 or 8 or even 10 hours for some other patients.
And again, you made a comment earlier, the longer it takes to get absorbed in your system, the longer the effect is.
Correct.
Now, the reason that it takes so long to be able to take effect, and the reason it lasts so long, is because your system, your stomach, converts that delta 9 THC into 11 hydroxy THC. Tell me a little bit about this, because this is really critical to understanding the timing related to edibles.
Yeah, so specifically, this isn't necessarily happening in your stomach. This is more happening in the liver, which is breaking down that THC into the 11 hydroxy THC. So to understand this, when we are digesting THC, the enzyme hydroxylates part of the cannabinoid, adding an oxygen and a hydrogen molecule to the structure, and that's what turns it into the 11 hydroxy THC. Unlike delta 9 THC, which is what we're ingesting, when we have 11 hydroxy THC, which is after it goes through our liver, that substance is actually more psychoactive and has more sedative properties than traditional THC. So it takes a while to go through this whole process. Afterwards, you have those effects for longer. So it takes a while to happen, but then we expect those effects to last a lot longer.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the warnings on this, because edibles look very familiar to other foods, but what you want to do is you want to just be cool and let them take effect, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good way to put it, is just be cool. So edibles typically mean easy dosing. We always encourage patients to check the packaging to know exactly how much THC and CBD is in one dose, and then to check the packaging to see exactly what one dose is. For example, in a pack of gummies, a single dose might be a single gummy. However, with something like a bar of chocolate, instead of eating the whole bar as your dose, it might be a square of chocolate or a half of a square, depending on how the bars are pre-cut. Soft edibles like gummies, cookies, brownies can be cut down into smaller doses like quarters or halves. Do have to really consider, if I'm using an edible, this is medication. So after I take it, I need to very consciously put the package away unless I want to consciously take another dose. So we always recommend just having other things to snack on, whether that is fruit, vegetables, something crunchy, salty, whatever your thing is, something that is non-medicated.
Nobody's ever died from using medical cannabis, or even cannabis in general, even adult use cannabis. You're not going to die from this if you take more than you want, but you're going to feel the effects. You'll get high.
Yeah, absolutely. So just like you said, there's no risk of overdose from cannabis products, but if you do take too much, you will probably be very uncomfortable, and that can mean paranoia, nausea, anxiety, impaired mobility. All of those things do go away with time.
Typically, when you're looking at edibles, there's some required materials. Tell me a little bit about that, because we can actually split those, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So with something like especially a gummy, we really recommend in the beginning cutting them down into a smaller dose. That can just be taking a butter knife and cutting it into quarters. Start with a quarter. Then if you find that that's not an effective dose, then the next time you need a dose, you would start at a half, because you know a quarter is not effective. And so you could continue to increase or decrease your dose just based on how you feel.
Now, let's also talk about the pros and cons, because here we have an example of a edible. It's from Air dispensaries, AY Air dispensaries. Now, this is a 5-to-1, and I want to point that out because it's 5 THC to 1 CBN. There's a lot of comments about gummies with THC only. They do have ratios, and that's what I wanted to show out here. But tell me a little bit about the pros and the cons.
The pros of edibles include, edibles offer an extremely effective way to deliver the benefits of cannabis, with about 35% of the product being converted in the liver and being available for use. They're long lasting, making them good for staying asleep at night or lasting throughout the day. Easy to administer, especially for beginners, meaning you can change your dose and titrate it either up or down. And they do actually tend to be a really cost effective item. Most dispensaries, it's not the most expensive product you can get there. There is a big upside to products like gummies, brownies, tinctures, because unlike something like a capsule, you can change the dose. You have that ability to change it. Cut a gummy and take a little bit more, and you don't necessarily need a full new product. There are some definite cons though. So one of the cons is that it is long lasting. So you do need to be aware that the effects will last an amount of time. It will be hours. Your mileage.
It could last as long as 10 hours. And that's what's important to point out, is that
Yeah.
if you have something planned for 4 or 5 hours from now, be very careful.
Yes, absolutely. Another con could be that they do have that very familiar appearance. It's a gummy, it's a piece of chocolate, it's a little cookie, because they are most certainly not a snacking item. They are a medicated product, and you have to think of them that way.
Right.
Another thing is the effects can take quite a while to take effect, and that lead up time or that onset time is generally when people make the mistake of taking more than they're comfortable for. So just like you said, be cool, give it time. And then another con can be that terpenes, which are compound that give cannabis its smell and its taste, not typically mentioned on the COA or the certificate of analysis for edibles. So oftentimes terpenes aren't even included in edibles.
So let's talk about when you make your own edibles. Tell me a little bit about that, because it's important that there's dispensary sourced edibles, but you can also make your own.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are points in favor of both dispensary made edibles and homemade edibles. So we're just going to touch on a few of them. So products from Florida licensed dispensaries are required to meet rigorous quality testing standards with multiple third-party lab tests. Professionally made edibles mean better homogenization, meaning the consistency in the type and the amount of THC, CBD, or other cannabinoids that are in the individual dose are going to be very consistent from dose to dose. Every product from a dispensary is required to have that COA or certificate of analysis, and that's going to tell you exactly what is in that product and what is not in that product. And that does include contaminants from manufacturing. Although it is possible to make homemade edibles with an approximate dose by using an edible dose calculator, such as one you can find online, edibles from a dispensary are generally more reliably consistent from dose to dose, like from piece of cookie to piece of cookie or piece of chocolate to piece of chocolate. On the other hand, homemade edibles give you a lot more control over the final product and the ingredients. That means you can tailor them to your taste and avoid things like allergens, or if you have a real problem with textures, you can always fix it to exactly your standards.
Sure. Now, and one of the things that's important about if you make your own brownies is there's a process called decarboxylation, which is converting the cannabis that you buy in the store, the actual flower, into THC, CBD. Tell me a little bit about that, because this is really critical to making sure that you get the benefits of medical cannabis.
You can absolutely use smokable flower to make your own edibles. It does take some time and some knowledge of the process. You do have to do something called decarboxylation. All that it is slowly heating the flower to the point where you've converted the THCA, which is the kind of inactive acidic form of THC, into THC. So you're taking away that acidic element of it. That converts it to an active form of THC so that when you're actually cooking with it, gives you the effects that you actually expect.
And naturally, if you're using flour, obviously you got to grind it up, put it in the mix, and then make sure that you mix it up correctly. You actually use a RSO syringe when you make your edibles, don't you?
Yeah, I use generally an RSO syringe or a distillate syringe. They tell you exactly on the package how many milligrams are in that product. And so, say if I buy a distillate syringe that has 800 milligrams of THC, and I make a batch of cookies or brownies and I use half of that syringe, I know that I've added 400 milligrams of THC to the product.
And the real key here is when you make them, whatever edibles you make, whether it's a gummy, brownie, cookie, or whatever, make sure that you mix it thoroughly to make sure the cannabis gets spread out throughout the whole mix. One of the big mistakes is you don't mix it enough and you get one brownie that's very strong in cannabis and the next one has almost nothing in it.
Absolutely. So generally when you're cooking with cannabis, you're always going to add, the smokable flower is generally going to be steeped in an oil, and you're infusing that oil with the THC, and then you strain out the actual smokable flower, and then you just use that THC infused oil in the product. Same thing if you were to use a distillate syringe, you'd add that directly to the oil that you're using, and then make sure it's very well mixed so that when you actually mix your other ingredients in, it's well spread out throughout the entire thing.
There's a link that we have in here at bit.ly/cooking cannabis that you can go to, and it'll give you some information on recipes, calculator, decarboxylation, really help you if you want to be able to make your own. And and don't be afraid to make your own edibles. I know that it's something that, as you mentioned, it helps you personalize the product and get you a product that not only do you comfortable with, but you'll use. But be careful. Pay attention to that onset and duration time that's really there. Well, we've just covered a number of topics on edibles, and I have to tell you that they're very effective, and are very effective, especially if you need to, for example, sleep through the night and you're looking for that 8 to 10 hours of coverage for medical cannabis. This is something that will work for you, and it's something that does, in fact, help you sleep through the night. Or if you're using a tincture or something else, what will happen is you potentially have that 2 to 4 hour, maybe 6 hour duration time. So if you take it at 10 o'clock at night, you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and basically you're back in pain, and you go back to your non-sleeping, your insomniac situation. So edibles will help you throughout the night, especially when you're looking at trying to do things like sleep or being able to manage pain. That being said, let's jump into some of the questions that we've been asked prior to the webinar, and then we'll answer your questions that you're asking during the webinar. So let's jump into the first question that we have here. First question is, when I take any oral products, edibles, it takes roughly 3 to 4 hours for them to take effect. Why? Well, every person's body is different, and I think that's what's really important. I know there's this concept of, at least the pharma drug folks do this thing of take 2 pills and call me in the morning, and in reality, what the doctor's really doing is giving you the minimum dose that's recommended, and he's hoping that it works. And if it doesn't work, of course, you got to call the doctor, and you got to get some more information and work with his practitioners and things like that. Same thing happens with medical cannabis. Every person's body is different, but you will have folks that, for example, will take an edible. It'll work within 20 minutes. You'll have another person take that same edible, and that will work in, like you said, 3 to 4 hours. This has to do with the metabolism of your system, and there's nothing wrong with your system. You are fine. It just happens to be the way your body absorbs the edible. Now, I should point out that when you are looking at an edible, what you're looking at is something that travels, again, into your digestive tract and then into your liver. So it's basically goes through a process of converting it to what they call 11-hydroxy THC, which is basically a form of THC that's very powerful, very medical, and really helps with a lot of things. But that's why it takes longer to work, and that's why it works longer. So it's really something that's there. Why is it working? Again, it's your metabolism. Nothing wrong with what you're doing. Nothing wrong with what you're taking a look at. It also has to do potentially with what you're taking with it. For example, if you eat some fats, you should eat some fats or fatty foods when you're taking any form of cannabis, whether that's edibles, whether that's or a tinctures, even smoking. Okay, it really helps with the absorption and the help your body be able to matriculate or be able to handle medical cannabis. So eating something with your product really helps. And again, anything that's fatty really helps in that particular area. Now, you'll say, well, yeah, but I'm taking these brownies, which are really fatty. They are, there's no question, but you're starting the clock ticking right at that point in time. So this could be one of the main reasons why you're having some issues. And again, nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. You have a body that just happens to have a slower metabolism, and just adjust for it. Just be very careful. Now, the other side of it is if it takes 3 to 4 hours of work, it may last longer than 10 hours. So I'd pay attention to the duration. I don't want you to get into a situation where it's going to last maybe 12 hours or 14 hours, and you still think that you're okay to do things. I pay a lot of attention um, to edibles because I'm really worried about what's going to happen 8 and 10 hours from now. And the people that I work with, people like my family or people that have friends who want to take edibles, I constantly remind them, what are you going to be doing like this afternoon or later on this evening? So they make sure that they're not in a situation where if they have a function, that they've taken too many or they've taken something that can hurt them. Also, I should point out, don't be cool. Don't take another one. It'll work. Give it time to work. And I think that's one of the issues one of the things I'm concerned about with edibles is people just need to give them time to work and not necessarily gluck them down. Now they do taste good, so that's one of the problems. Let's take a look at the next question. It says, I use edibles during the day for pain. I alternate between sativa and hybrid. Is one or the other better for my pain relief? Well, candidly, it doesn't really make any difference if it's sativa or hybrid. Sativa actually is something that'll get you something to be more energetic. Hybrid, obviously being a mix of sativa and indica, will be something that's right in the middle of the road. It's not that one is better or worse. It's like what is your routine and what do you want to use it for? A lot of people will use a sativa product in the morning or in the afternoon where they need the energy. They'll use a hybrid or an indica product in the evening where they'll be able to want to relax and be able to just be able to calm down. So I don't think it's a matter of which is better or not. It's what really, first of all, fits your lifestyle, what you want to do, and also something that you're very, very comfortable with. That's what's really, really important. I think what you also want to do is pay attention to when you're looking at pain relief during the day. One of the things I pointed out down here is the source of the pain, because if it is acute, okay, or if it's chronic, it has different characteristics on how it reacts in your body. Cannabis will help with both of those, but again, it may have a different duration time and an onset time in order to be able to handle those particular situations. Let's run to the next question. Do you need a state-issued medical card to purchase these products? I had one in the past, but I found it was hard to understand. Well, first of all, almost all of the products that we talk about here are medical marijuana products. And what that means here in the state of Florida and in a lot of other states, Georgia, Louisiana, New York, California, it really helps to have a medical marijuana card to be able to purchase the product. In fact, here in Florida, you can't buy medical cannabis without a medical marijuana card. In other states that have both a rec program that offer medical marijuana cards, and in many cases, they offer you a card because it gives you a tax break. For example, instead of paying that 25 or 30% tax, you're paying nothing. And that makes a big, big difference. I know for my mother in California, that makes a big difference for her. Now, I do want to point out that yes, you do have to have a card to buy these products. And if you had a card in the past, you typically will have to go in and ask them if you can get another card. They'll be able to give you another card. You can just get a re-registration. Now, one of the biggest things that's happened here in Florida is they passed the regulations where the doctor does not give you a prescription. He gives you what they call a recommendation. What does that mean? He'll recommend some types of products, oral, tincture, topical, for example, flower. They'll recommend those routes of administration, but they won't tell you what products to use. They basically restricted the doctors from being able to do that. Now, I think that what's interesting is it makes it hard for patients to understand what product to use for their particular condition. That's why we have webinars. For example, next week we're doing a webinar on terpenes, which will help you identify the terpenes you need for your condition. Once you understand that, you'll be able to get the products at home right in on products that will help you with your particular condition. One of the things I don't like is that a lot of doctors will get you the card and then say, see you later. You get your $99 card and then you have no support. One of the reasons I like medical marijuana treatment clinics in Florida is they do two things. First of all, once you get your card, prior to getting your card, you get emails that'll talk to you about getting your medical marijuana card, what to do for your actual appointment, how to prep. It'll actually, once you get your card, every 2 weeks, you get another email that walks you through that whole process of how to use medical cannabis the first 6 months. And this is really critical for a lot of patients because if you don't understand that, you won't necessarily have the products, routes of administration, or the process to really take full advantage of that medical cannabis product. and actually the cannabis products that you're really using. So I would recommend going to a clinic that actually gives you support. And the only one that I know that does that here in Florida is the Medical Marijuana Treatment Clinics of Florida. They not only have the email campaign, we call it the Journey, that helps you, takes you through that, but also they have a call center, which allows you to call if you have any problems or if you need help with dosing. I think that's really, really key. I think your issue was, like you said, when it's hard to understand, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take away that stigma. We're trying to take away that lack of understanding. One of the reasons I do these webinars is to make it clear for people what it is, how it works. And basically, that's why we also let people ask questions so we can get down and really understand a lot of, help you understand what it is and how it can help you. Our goal is to help you get your life back. That's what it's all about. Let's talk about the next question, which is concerning chocolate. How much to take? Thanks. Well, this goes back to the old edible question of how much you should take. I think it's important to understand when you're using medical cannabis, you have to go through, and I recommend going through a process called dosing, where you identify your therapeutic dosing level. That means how much THC can I tolerate, and at what point when I take THC, it'll actually help me, but it'll help me to a certain point when I take a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. But then when I go past my therapeutic dosing level, it'll cause the opposite to happen because cannabis is what they call biphasic. So if it's relieving the pain until you get to your therapeutic dosing level, if you go past your therapeutic dosing level, what it'll do is it can actually bring some of that pain back. So what you want to do is understand your dosing level. And how do you do that? Well, we'll have it in 2 weeks. We have a webinar on dosing. I suggest you follow that. But in a nutshell, what you're really doing is you're really going to start with a product, let's say an edible, cut it, take an edible that can be cut up, take that gummy, cut it into a quarter, try that first, find out how your body reacts to it, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out, what your dosing level is. In the case of chocolates, each of the chocolates that you buy, especially here in Florida, will come in little tabs. Usually, and not all the time, but usually those tabs are 5 milligrams per tab. So you know that if you have that tab that's there, you know how much is there now. How do you know how much is it there? How much is the tab? Look at the certificate of analysis, and or ask the bud tender what the dosage is. But I would say again, when you take the chocolate, break that little tab in half. Start with a lower dosing level. Try it for a day or so. If it doesn't have any effect, then take a little bit more. Take a little bit more after that. So you go from maybe a quarter of a tab to half a tab to maybe even taking 2 tabs, depending on your particular condition. What you don't want to do is take the product. Let's say you take take one of the little tabs of chocolate, and then literally 20 minutes later, because it's not working, take another one. That's something that you really don't want to do, because if you keep doing that, when it takes, let's say, an hour or 2 hours of work, you could be taking 2 to 3 times more cannabis than you really need, which is going to put you in that heady or that high condition, which you may or may not want. And if you don't want to have that, I'm saying just be cool, because what you want to do is get to a position where you're treating your condition, getting the therapeutic dosing that you need, but you don't necessarily want to be high. And that's one of the things that we try to do with medical cannabis. So what I'm trying to point out is how much to take. I can't give you an answer. I know in my particular case, when I buy chocolates and I use chocolates, I take 2 tabs. But again, I tried a half a tab, 3/4 of a tab, a whole tab, and I kind of worked my way up. And when I found out when I took 3 tabs, it really caused the pain not to go away. I'm managing pain and inflammation. It didn't go away the way I wanted it to. I found that 2 tabs are better than 3 tabs, which is great. Cost me less money, and I know that it's there. Now, if you look at the different products that you see here, now these are products from Air dispensaries. They have different, like you say, there's different mints, for example, soft chews, and edibles, and they each have terpenes. They all have different therapeutic dosing levels. But be very, very careful, because what you want to do is make sure that you can, for example, in the cookies, you can cut them in half. Chews, you can cut them in half. The problem with the mints and the lozenges, they're very hard to cut in half. You typically have to try one and then go for another one. So it's something that's there. Again, this is something that you have to really tune in yourself. Again, we have a concept called go low and go slow. Try a half a tab, then try a full tab, and then go from there. You'll figure out what works. Let a day or 2 go by, then try another one. You'll feel it. I know that when I started doing dosing, The first couple of days, it was like I was drinking water. It didn't make any difference. But the third day, I got to a level where I started feeling it, and I was managing pain and inflammation. And when my pain started going away, I knew that I was on the right track. When I went past my therapeutic dosing level and I wasn't feeling as comfortable, wasn't getting the relief I wanted, that's when I backed down to where I am today. And now I know exactly how much THC I'm tolerant to and how much is really there. And I hope that really helps. But I'm not trying to avoid your question. I'm trying to give you a formula to be able to find out how much to take, which is really your body will tell you. There's no doctor and there's no medical cannabis expert that's going to help you. Your body is really the answer to that. I hope that helps. The other question that we have coming up is, I wish the carb amount was posted on all edibles. I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I don't use them. Well, it's interesting because here in the state of Florida, you typically you typically should have that information on the package. But unfortunately, a lot of the dispensary products are regulated differently from regular foods. So they don't necessarily require nutritional facts on there. The state doesn't require that. Now, I know some people do. There are a couple of edibles like the Camino products that you saw, Wana products that are from other dispensaries from, and you'll see that they do have the nutritional value on there. Most of them, I would say, 90% of the products don't have any nutritional value. I will tell you that most edibles have either sugar in them or some sort of a sugar substitute. So if you're diabetic, it's something that you may want to stay away from, especially if you're type 1 diabetic, because you can't, unless you know what's in there, how much you're taking, and the strength, it can just get you into trouble. So unfortunately, edibles probably aren't going to be in your toolbox of products that can really help you that's really there. And I hope that answered your question, because I can't change the laws, but I do know that right now we're doing a lot of work, I know from a lobbying standpoint, to get more information to the public and also to make these products more clear. So hopefully in the future we'll be talking about regulations. I know that there are some bills that have been suggested here in the state of Florida to put nutritional facts on there. I don't know where they stand, and I don't know if they're going to be passed, but I do know that they're in the works. So I hope that really answers. There was also a question about how long do gummies maintain their strength. I think that was a question that really came up. And typically, if you buy a gummy product, it will maintain its strength for about a year. You have about a 12-month cycle. After that, the gummy will be good. It'll just degrade. In other words, you won't get the same medical value. You'll get maybe 90% or 80% of the medical value. And after about 2 years, maybe 3 years, it will drop down to maybe as much as 50%. So typically, your life cycle for a gummy should be about a year. Same thing goes with chocolates and other things. They typically will last about a year. And then the second year is, again, you're not going to die from taking it, but what'll happen is it just won't be as effective. Where you took it after you just bought the product, you took maybe a gummy and it worked, you may have to take two years from now. So that's kind of hopefully that helps answer your question about how do they lose their strength. The answer is yes, they do. The next question is, tinctures, gummies, and edibles give me headaches, maybe from the TMCT carrier. What edibles do not use MCT oil? It's interesting. I've not gone through and I've not investigated how many use MCT oil and don't. I know it's a very popular product. The only thing I could tell you on that, I would recommend that when you go and you talk to the dispensary, ask them what's in the product. There's a lot of dispensaries that have got away from MCT oil. So what have they gone to? They use coconut oil. It's something that's out there. There are other cutting agents that they use that they've been able to come up with. And I know there's some sunflower seed oils that they use. I know that there's some vegetable oils that are being used in some of the edibles that are out there. So really, I would really ask around. The MCT product was used very actively about 2 years ago. Now today, I know there's a lot less elements out there. I can't give you a list because I just don't know. But I would say the best thing to do is ask the dispensary itself which ones don't use MCT oil. Now, a lot of the national brands that have come out there, products like the Camino products, are products that you handle nationally. They've really cut down on the amount of MCT oil for this exact reason, and they're using other cutting agents. So you may want to take a look at that. I hope that answers your question. Unfortunately, I just don't know. But I think the best way is to ask the dispensary, or when you're looking at that dispensary, find out from the COA. You can usually click on the product. There's a tab at the bottom that'll say certificate of analysis. Click on that, and that'll tell you if it has MCT oil in it or not. I hope that helps a little bit. One of the other questions is how long should and can one keep infused butter or coconut oil in the refrigerator? Classically, I've been told by a couple of people that are chefs, cannabis chefs, about a quarter. But you want it, especially infused butter or can of butter, typically has a life cycle of about 3 months. It will last longer than that. You could use a can infused butter, 6 months, maybe pushing it at a year. But I'd say within 3 months, I'd use it. No more than 6 months, I'd probably take a look at that. Now, coconut oil is a whole different game. Well, coconut oil will last a lot longer. Coconut oil should last easily about a year, potentially even a year and a half. It has a different chemical makeup, and if you're infusing coconut oil with cannabis, it'll work very well. And I know that's why I use a lot of times when you're cooking, for example, making brownies and things like that, people will use things like coconut oil or mix a little bit in there because it's that fat that's needed to really help you trigger the cannabis, and it's also something that lasts a little bit longer. So I hope that really helps. It'll give you a little bit of time. But do keep them in a place that's dark, which your refrigerator is. And if you kill them, that would really help quite a bit. Although the darkness is really the key that's there, as well as the refrigeration. It really helps be able to get the longevity of the life that's really out there. Next question is, what's the best way to make your own edibles like brownies and cookies? Can you use distillate or tinctures? Well, the answer is you can use distillates. I know there are people that do use tinctures that are out there. I would recommend that if you're going to, the best way to use it is I would use what they call a syringe, because you can get like an RSO syringe or a syringe that is not one that has a needle on it. It's a syringe that has a product. And I know those are very effective for making edible products. I tend to prefer to use flour. I get the flour, I grind it up, and I do the decarboxylation process where I will actually take the actual product from the dispensary, grind it up, put it on a parchment paper cookie sheet, and then I'll cook that for approximately 35 minutes at a temperature of about 240 degrees. What that does is it converts the THCA, CBDA, and CBCA to THC, CBD, and CBC. Then I let it sit for about an hour, and then I drop it right into my brownies, and it really helps quite a bit. Now, I also make sure that in my case, because I use flour, I mix it very, very well. If you're using a syringe, which is basically like an RSO syringe or something like that, you can mix it very, very well. Just make sure that it's all mixed in well. And you can typically, it mixes a lot easier if it's a syringe than if it's it works better than it's in a flour. Syringes work better than flowers. Now, distillates, I'm not really high on distillates or tinctures for cooking. I just found that when I've used a tincture, it just didn't work as well as the syringes did. And I also don't like the distillates because they don't have any terpenes in them, which is really important. The terpenes are what give you your medical value. And when I buy a product, for example, a flower or a syringe, I can actually look at the terpene profile and make sure it matches the condition that I'm trying to treat, which in my case is pain and inflammation, and get the right product to really help me with my situation. Now, if I'm just making the brownies to get high, that's a whole different game. But if I'm making the brownies, which in my case, which is to lower my pain level and my inflammation so I can sleep at night, then I pay attention to the terpene profile. And I hope that really helps. Next question is, are they trying to keep THC beverages from liquor stores in Florida? Well, let me answer your question directly. The liquor industry is trying to keep THC product beverages from any liquor store in the United States. They paid a significant amount of money to Mitch McConnell to put a rider in the last bill that really has caused hemp to be severely restricted as of November of last year. Why does the liquor industry want to stop this? Well, when I did my THC, I did a THC drinks webinar, and in researching that, talking to the liquor stores like ABC Liquor and things like that, out of the top 5 brands that they sell, believe it or not, the THC drinks were 3 of the top 5. They have gone from nowhere to being a top selling product in all of these liquor stores, and in fact is severely cutting back the amount of alcohol products that are being sold. So if you're a vendor that makes alcohol products and distributes alcohol products, you just really, unless you have THC products as part of your product line, they're trying to restrict that. And that's what they did by, I'll use the word lobbying Mitch McConnell to put this law into the federal system. Now, there's been a lot of pushback on that. There's a lot of people that have basically said, why would I want to restrict a product that basically gives me the buzz I want without the hangover and causes me not to get as crazy as I do on alcohol? And candidly, as a medical professional, I can tell you alcohol is more of a poison than it is a benefit. So why don't I go with a more natural product that's out there? And I think there's a lot of discussions on that. I know there's some bills being suggested right now to extend the aged hemp business 2 years out so they can get the regulations correct. But I think the real issue isn't are the politicians trying to do this. Politicians are basically pay to play. They take their money from lobbyists, and right now the alcohol lobby just does not want THC drinks in the liquor stores because, candidly, it's cutting back on their business. I think if we talk about running a world that is, or a country that's supposed to be capitalistic, they should be able to stand up to that particular threat or that particular challenge. That's really what's going on right now. And all I can say is stay tuned because there's a lot of action going on in that area and a lot of discussion. Next question is, when I'm making edibles at home, how do I calculate when using concentrates from the dispensary versus when I'm using flour or decarboxylating it? Well, the best thing to do is there is a website out there, the lady out there, whose name is Sherry, Cannabis Sherry. And she has a website that talks about a lot of the recipes. I know her, I've talked to her, her and I are pretty good friends, and she does have a calculator for concentrates that you can get, and it's free. You can pick that up. Now, how do you know how much you're using? Well, typically what you want to be able to do is understand your therapeutic dosing level. In other words, if you're very sensitive to THC, I wouldn't use as much as if you are not sensitive to THC. So I would probably use, again, go low and go slow. I'd really cut back on that. But what you want to do is, for example, I'm very tolerant to THC. So I will use 7 milligrams of flour when I make my product. When we make my wife's product, which we make some muffins for her, we typically use only 3.5 milligrams. We cut that in half because she's not as tolerant to THC as I am. Now that's just from her and I doing, understanding our therapeutic dosing level. I can't give you an exact concentrate level because it really depends on what you're sensitive to, what your therapeutic dosing level is or not. But I would say start with approximately a quarter of that syringe. Try that. Don't make a whole. If you're making some brownies, for example, just make a small batch of brownies. Use a quarter. You use a little bit, the equivalent of about a quarter for the whole thing, or measure it down. That if you used the whole syringe for one, you'd want to cut that down into a lot less. And just try a little bit. Try a couple of drops and see what's there, and find out what's your therapeutic dosing level. Now, when you're using flour and decarboxylating it, that's again, I would say I'd go low and go slow and find out what your therapeutic dosing level is. Or the other issue is a lot of times when you make a brownie that's very, very strong, what you may want to do is only take a quarter of it or a half of it, so you'll be able to have them last a lot longer. I know that I have friends of mine who enjoy my brownies. We make what we call our magic brownies for sleeping at night, and they'll take a quarter or a half a brownie because they don't have the tolerance to THC that I do. So I can't give you an exact number. I can say Sherry Cannabis can help you be able to find. I tell them that Sherry Cannabis can help you exactly calculate that. You may want to take a look at that. And then also, don't forget, check out the COA, Certificate of Analysis. It'll tell you how many milligrams are there. It'll tell you how the strength of the product. It'll tell you the percentage of THC, for example, versus CBD. And so that'll actually be a pretty good clue. If you're buying a product that's high in THC, you'll probably use less of it than if you were buying a product, let's say in the 25 to 30% range, versus a product that may be in the 15 to 20% range. You use a lot less of that. Pay attention to the packaging because that's really an important part that's really there. So I hope that really answered that particular question. Let's jump into some of the questions that we had, live questions from the attendees. Claude asked an interesting question. What's happening in my body if I feel a sense of pain after taking an edible? Well, Claude, this is a perfect example, I think, where you're taking more THC than your therapeutic dosing level. And I think I mentioned earlier that as you start using more and more if you start looking at, as you're using more and more of the product, you'll start getting you get like a quarter of a product, a quarter of a gummy to a half a gummy to a 3/4 of a gummy. You're going to begin to feel whatever, for example, you'll get the relief from your pain. At some point in time, you'll take, let's say, 2 gummies, and you'll find out that you're not getting the pain relief that you were getting with 1 gummy. Okay. What I found in my particular case, as I mentioned in the bars, in little squares of chocolate, I found that two squares were great. 3 squares, the pain started coming back, which my objective was to get rid of the pain. So what's happening is I think you're probably more sensitive to THC than you think. I would recommend, Claude, is you take that gummy, cut it in half, try that, and see what happens. Because you'll probably find that you won't necessarily, if you're backing down that therapeutic dosing curve, you're getting down to a position where your body may be able to get the relief without necessarily bringing on the pain. Because again, cannabis is biphasic. You take more of it, it works the opposite of the effect that you really want to have. You need to back down and really look at that. And I think that's what the issue is that you're trying here. Try a half a gummy or a quarter of a gummy. Try that for a day and then see what happens. And then slowly go to half, quarter, half, more than that. You'll see exactly what happens. Other question is, does CBD counteract the effects? Well, or counteract THC effects, excuse me. The answer to your question is yes. If you take some THC and you're starting to get high, if you take an equal amount of CBD, it'll within 20 minutes, you'll come right back down to where you were before. In fact, it may be less than 20 minutes and maybe as much as 5 minutes. I recommend anybody who's new to cannabis and anybody who's really dosing to have some CBD around, because if you take a little bit more THC and you're beginning to get that heady, that high effect, and you don't want it, by taking some CBD, it brings it down. It is the best way to counteract the effects of THC. And when you have a product that's what they call a full spectrum product, which is using CBD and THC together, what's happening is the CBD is really cutting down on the effects of the THC, allowing you to take more of that product than you would if it was just THC alone. So the answer is yes. I recommend THC. Now, what are other ways to counteract the THC effect? Black pepper, for example. But I don't recommend chewing on black pepper unless you really like hot stuff. I prefer the CBD approach. It's much more civilized. Let's put it that way. Barry asked the question is, how can I get terpenes that are specific if you can't see it on the COA? Well, interestingly enough, almost all products list the terpenes in the COAs, although in a lot of edibles, they don't necessarily list the COAs that are out there. And that's what's really, really important. What you may want to do is you may want to, when you go talk to the dispensary itself, they typically will be able to find out what terpenes are in the product, if there are any at all. In edibles that are made with isolates, meaning there's no terpenes, there will be none. Okay, so that's something that's really to be careful of. That's why I worry about a lot of people that take edibles straight because they're all THC or isolate THC. They'll get you high, but they won't necessarily help your medical condition. That's why I prefer a 1-to-1 THC, a 2-to-1, 5-to-1, 1-to-5. I prefer a ratioed type of edible rather than a straight edible, because I want to make sure that A, I'm getting that CBD in there that helps me with my particular case, the inflammation. And number two, the chances of having terpenes in that product are much higher when it's a ratioed product than when it's an isolate by itself. So I hope that really helps. I know that you can get a hold of people like Air and other dispensaries, and you can talk to them and they'll actually give you the terpenes that are in the product itself. And I think that's really, really important, because our goal is really help you get your life back. And that's going to be being able to tune in the terpenes that you need. And again, look at the ratioed products. Probably heading in that direction will help you be able to find the terpenes that are in the product and the terpenes you need for your particular condition that's really out there. And I'm going to give you a shameless plug. Next week, we're doing a whole webinar on terpenes and which conditions and which terpene you should be using. Please feel free to tune in and take a look. Anyway, I think we've answered most of the questions that are out there. What other question is? Okay, other question is, how do you read the ratio? That's a good question. Well, ratio, typically you'll see when they say 1-to-1, that's 1 CBD to 1 THC. If it says 2-to-1, that means there's 2 portions of CBD to 1 portion of THC. So when you look at the COA, what it'll do is if you look at the amount of product that's in there, you may see a 2-to-1 product will have 2 parts of CBD to 1 part of THC. 9-to-1 is 9 CBD to 1 THC, and the other way, it goes the other way. You can have a 1-to-4 or a 1-to-9, which is 1 CBD to 4 THC or 9 THC. So I hope that helps you read that particular ratio, because I know it can get confusing, but just rule of thumb. First number is always the CBD number, and then what the question becomes, for you personally, what's important? In my case, I have to manage inflammation. I'm constantly looking for a ratioed product that has CBD in it, because I found that CBD and THC just works great for my body. CBD by itself and THC by itself kind of works, but not as well as when I mix them together. So anyway, I hope that really helps. Again, that first number is always CBD. And so it's something, and it's kind of an industry standard. So it's something that you really take a look at that's out there. Any other questions that are there? I don't think there are. What I do want to do is I do want to tell everybody, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And it's important for me is to really provide information to you to help you get your life back. If just one person watches this webinar and is able to really address their condition, start living the life they want to live, that's really, really important to us. This may be where you may not be able to play any golf at all, and now you're playing 4 holes, 6 holes, or 8 holes, or pickleball, or just walking, something that really, really helps. I hope that's really there. So I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's important that you're there. Please feel free to tune into our YouTube channel, Marijuana Aware, where this video will be posted by the end of the week, where you can actually check out this video, plus other videos that are out there that talk about medical cannabis. All of our webinars go on YouTube, and what you'll do is you'll find that it's a very important resource that can answer a lot of your questions you may be looking at. I want to thank Air Dispensary for sponsoring tonight. By the way, I recommend them. They have a full range of products, very high quality manufacturer of or grower of medical cannabis, and they also do a great job of training their staff, their bud tenders, to help you with your particular condition. And again, it's something that you'll be able to find. Their COAs are right on their website. If you're looking for a card, again, I mentioned medical marijuana treatment clinics of Florida. Please feel free to do that. And of course, if you're looking for patient education, Marijuana Aware, and of course, not only these webinars, our YouTube channels. Before I sign out, I do want to thank our commentators, Lee and Leah, behind the scenes, who really helped make this thing happen. And more importantly, I want to thank you for joining us. And please join us next week. We'll be talking about terpenes. The week after, we're going to be talking about dosing. Then we're getting into arthritis, neuropathy, and then in March, we're going to be talking about weight loss. So thank you for joining us. And again, we hope you